Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a bit of a rambly video on the theme of trashy books. Since Criminali's project of GarbAugust is in full swing, and he's not the only, he has a bunch of people co-hosting who I will either link to below or link to one of his videos where he mentions everybody. But in any case, because of that, I've seen a lot of people making videos on the theme of trashy novels, some of which are love songs to trash, some of which are kind of pondering the question of what is trash? Is this trash? Is this trash? How trashy do you have to be to call something trash? And is it dismissive? I've seen a few people who have rejected the whole idea and are absolutely not participating because they think it's degrading to call any book trash, or that it's degrading to themselves to call anything trash. Hilariously, I would say at least 40% of the people that I've seen say that kind of thing don't actually read any trash, so I don't know why they're objecting. Because if you don't, why are you even talking about it to begin with? Now, I obviously take exception to that because, as I said, I love some fun trash. I have my Oscar the Grouch prop here because that just seemed appropriate for this kind of thing. I'm going to start by saying a book can be trash without having a trashy cover. I think it is tragic, in a superficial kind of way, that we don't get trashy covers across genres anymore. I feel like romance is the last bastion of a good trashy cover. It used to be science fiction, fantasy, thrillers, even quote-unquote literary fiction used to get trashy covers. I saw Shelley Swearingen, who's one of the co-hosts on this, held up a Mary Balogh book, and it had a clinch cover, and she was saying, well, it looks trashy because of the shoulders, but can I just say what a tragedy it is that these newer ones don't have the clinch covers? I mean, some new books do. Look, there's some shoulders. We need to celebrate that kind of cover, and not this respectable nonsense. But that doesn't tell you a book is not or is trash, because look at the nude lady on this cover of Graham Greene's The End of the Affair, or this weirdly sexy looking lady on Steinbeck's Sweet Thursday. This is what covers used to look like, even for, as I said, quote-unquote literary fiction. We need to have that again. I'm all in favor of trash covers, and I'm comfortable in calling them that because they're clearly trying to play into a kind of exploitation, excitement thing. And so that's why I would qualify that as trash, because it's not trying to pretend to be neutral. Because I don't even think that that's highbrow, lowbrow. No, it's trying to be neutral and generic. But back to books, and never mind the covers, although we need more trashy covers. Personally, I think the biggest indicator of whether something is trash is whether it lives or dies based on the framework, or, to go with the trash metaphor, the bin that it's restricted to, or the sides of the trash can, if you prefer that. Because so many of the genres that I think we think of as trashy, and especially if we narrow it to subgenres, like I see some people talking about overarching all mysteries, for example, and I don't think all mysteries are what most people would call trash, or most non-snobby people at least would call trash. Similarly, all science fiction, all fantasy, but there are definitely subgenres in each of those that 100% are. I think the most obvious place to see that is in franchise fiction, though, because, to use a great example, this is a comic book retelling of the plot of Rogue One. The writer and the artist on this do not have the freedom to change the story. I'm going to spoil Rogue One if for some reason you don't know what happens, but everyone dies in Rogue One. So this writer and artist cannot change the fact that everyone dies in this story. It's a franchise product. Now, even the books that aren't retellings are limited by that. I made a video a couple of years ago now, I think, which I'll link to this side, I think. In that, I was talking about a Star Wars tie-in novel called Resistance Reborn, which is by Rebecca Roanhorse, who I have not read her non-franchise books, but there are a lot of them, and most of them are fairly well reviewed on BookTube. She writes urban fantasy, I think, primarily. And as I said, people like her own work. But this franchise book was not particularly well reviewed, and the problem with it, or the issue that I think she had writing it, is that because it is set in between two of the Star Wars movies and it involves major characters in the films, she was restricted in what she could do. And if you're not used to writing a franchise book where you are restricted like that, that's really challenging. And that is a restriction. You don't have complete freedom. So if you're looking at a work as a piece of art on its own, a franchise book just does not stand on its own. It can't. Now, I think there are some authors who do very well in that. I think Paul Cornell, for one, is somebody he writes his own work as well. He had like a ghost detective series that's sort of urban fantasy mystery set in London. He has the Witchford series, which is a kind of rural urban fantasy set someplace in, I think, the Midlands in England. And they're fine, but I honestly think his Doctor Who novels and his Captain Britain book for Marvel are better on a lot of levels. So he kind of thrives within a framework, and not everybody does. And that's something that you very much notice in a franchise book. I think having restrictions is a good example of something being trash, because you are intentionally making it much harder for somebody to make a quality product, because a lot of the things that you could bring in creatively and quality-wise, you are prevented from bringing in. Again, I say trash with love. And of course, it doesn't need to be a media tie-in, because some genres just have incredibly tight constraints as well. Cozy mysteries are one, because you can't go above a certain level of harshness, because if you do that, then it goes into the generic mystery category. You have to solve the crime, because otherwise it's just kind of a small town piece of women's fiction most of the time. It's not a cozy mystery if you don't solve the mystery. The romance genre is even more structured than that, because it tends to hit the same plot points, and you always have a drama point 3/4 of the way through the story, and you have generally a happily ever after, sometimes a happily for now. If you don't have that particular pattern, it's not in the genre anymore. But if you are writing for the genre, you are writing in this box. And if you go outside the box, it's no longer a romance. It might be a romantic comedy, a romantic tragedy, it might be chick lit, quote unquote. If they take themselves too seriously, it probably moves over into some literary category, but it is not romance. Oh, it might have been in the comments of one of Scott and Nell from Gunpowder Fiction and Plots videos. And I think I was talking to Fraser Simons from Springboard Thoughts, and he was saying that one of his favorite romances in a discussion of genre romance was The English Patient, which by definition is not a genre romance, because one of the couples, they both die, and one of the other couples, they are not in a happily ever anything. That is a spoiler, but that book is histographic metafiction. You should not be reading that for the plot. Although I suppose I just spoiled the movie, so. In any case, it's not a romance. It's just a story with romantic plot points, right? So part of what sticking within that framework then makes trashy, I think, is that it allows a lot of authors to coast, because you know what the story is, you know the points that the story is going to hit, so you don't need to pay attention to all of the details of the plot. So if they don't include that, like I've read genre romances, for example, where there's a bit of exposition, something happens, there's a bit of exposition. There's no real build to it, because everybody who is reading that knows what the build is going to be. Now, I think a better writer would do that properly, but because the genre is so constrained, you don't have to, and I think that is innately kind of trashy. For example, if I pick up a book like this, which is one of those cheesy billionaire romances, I bought this exclusively because there is a visible wheelchair on the cover, and this is an ongoing complaint I have with, well, with books in a number of genres, but especially in romances where there is a character who's a wheelchair user and they never show it on the cover, with a couple of examples. So I felt like I had to buy this because it did that. These books are bad because they are based, the plot points that those specific billionaire romances are based on are, one, a side of ethnic cliches, because, yeah, you know, this one has the word Italian in the cover. Sometimes they have the word Greek, sometimes they have the word sheikh, or chic, depending on your accent. So you have big money, ethnic stereotypes. And then you have your set plot points. And in any other context, that's kind of gross. And I think that is another reason I am completely comfortable saying, here's some trash. If you can write this gross stuff and people are going to overlook it because they like the stuff that sits around the gross stuff, and I don't want to sound like I'm just insulting romance here. Like, don't let me make this sound like that's a romance issue. This is also an issue in a lot of military and spy action stories, military thrillers, military historical fiction. All of this has exactly the same problem that you see in romance and cozy mysteries, which is that, like, this is Tom Clancy's Patriot Games. This is a well-loved copy that I have had since childhood. This book is bad. The dialogue in this is terrible. Prince Charles is an actual character in this book. Like, that's the level of nonsense that this is. But you are not reading it because you want to see a realistic portrait of Prince Charles, circa 1988. Or is it 86? I forget. But there are legitimately parts of this book that are terrible if you were judging them on their own. If I showed you an excerpt of some of the dialogue in here where the main character is having a picnic with Prince Charles, you would think, what is this trash? But the action and the suspense is very well done. And again, it's coasting through the trash to get to the parts that are good, because this is a genre in which it doesn't matter that the main character is having a nonsense picnic with Prince Charles. Questionable in a multitude of ways, but also entertaining. As a side thing, I was talking in the comments on Brian from Bookish made a trash-related video a while ago, and I commented on it about how Tom Clancy is himself a brand. He's dead, but these books with his name on them keep coming out because it's a brand name now, and most of the other authors who write in that brand are mostly better at writing dialogue than he was, which is hilarious to me. And actually, I think I mentioned in passing with that, I think a lot of military historical fiction starts out being kind of good and evolves into trash over time. Sadly, all of my copies of the Sharp series are in storage right now, so I'm going to hold up Rebel, which is one of Bernard Cornwell's older series. But like, I've been a huge fan of the Sharp series for years. And I think when you read the first few, he's obviously evolved a lot as a writer over the years, so I think as a writer he's better, and some of his other series are not as more serious historical fiction and not as fun and as fun trash as the Sharp series. But the thing is, as it evolves, and there have been, I don't know, 25 books, or maybe, I think it's something like 23 full books, but there are a bunch of side stories and things that have been coming out since 1980. There's going to be a new one coming out in October. He's been writing these forever. He can write these in his sleep. Nobody's been shot as often as the Sharp character. Nobody would have survived that in real life. At a certain point, I think, I was going to say up until Waterloo, because there's, between Sharp's Eagle and Sharp's Waterloo, I think you can say, okay, this was fun, but not necessarily trash. But post Waterloo, where the books start going back in time, and it's just, this is very clearly a product and not just a work on its own. And again, that's where I'm comfortable with trash. And this is not an insult to those books, because even though I don't have them on hand to show you, I've bought some of the Sharp books in at least 3 editions per book. So I am definitely not denigrating Bernard Cornwell's work by calling it trash, because I have given him lots of money. They are fun, but they are no longer realistic depictions of somebody in history, right? Because that character would have been dead so many times. Also, this brings us to another thing that I think is trashy. If you have a series that goes on so long that you can retcon things, retroactive continuity, when you pretend that something happened differently in the past. So, because Cornwell was such a fan of Sean Bean in the Sharp TV series, that in the books that were written after the TV series started, he stopped mentioning Sharp's hair color, because in the early ones, Sharp has black hair. And actually, Paul McGann was supposed to originally play Sharp, but then he broke his leg and had to be replaced by Sean Bean. So there's some useless knowledge for you. In any case, so he stopped commenting on that because the blonde actor, and also he rewrote the character's history a little bit, or added stuff to the history, because originally Sharp was a Londoner and he changes him to a Yorkshireman because that's Sean Bean's accent. And a retcon is trash. Like, that's very common in comics and corporate books. But when you're doing it to your own series that you own, yeah, maybe a little trashy. Anyway, this is long, so I haven't even talked about all the mysteries that I think have gotten trashy, but that's plenty of those. Mysteries, not necessarily cozy mysteries, but more traditional detective-style mysteries, tend to go the same way as the military historical fiction, in that they start out in a really good, interesting place where you will have a few books that are quality, and then they sort of slide into trash. And they can continue being fun because a lot of what you enjoyed in the first few is probably still there, but it's probably still there in exactly the same way. And if it's just the same thing being regurgitated, is that quality? It's fun, but it's not necessarily good. I think this was too rambly, so I should have I should have scripted this because I think I rambled on long enough. Hopefully I can edit this down to something that is mostly coherent. In any case, what is your favorite trash? Do you embrace the trash? Do you think it's degrading to the authors and yourself to call things trash? I obviously don't. And I don't understand the perspective that says that it is. I don't get it. I was going to put in something and say, that's fine if you do. And it is fine if you do. Who cares? None of this matters. This is, you know, meaningless babbling, right? But I am curious as to how exactly you think it's degrading to yourself and to anyone else when you are promoting the stuff. This is the thing that I don't get, right? This is people talking about, this is fun trash. How is that an insult? I don't understand it, because it's not like saying this is irredeemable trash. It's fun trash. I don't know. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Tell me I'm an idiot. I don't care. I feel like talking about genre fiction at all invites people to come and insult you and tell you you're wrong. So that's always fun. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.